Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. And a little birdie told me that in the new year, you're gonna make a temperature blanket or a scarf. This is actually from 2022, but such a fun project to do. Will I ever do it again? Probably not. Maybe a scarf, maybe a temperature scarf could be cute. It's a lot of work, but you definitely will not regret it. Even though I wouldn't make it again, it's one of my favorite things I've ever crocheted, and just so much time and effort went into it. But throughout the process, I learned a lot despite all of the research I did ahead of time. So here are the 5 things you need to know before you start your temperature crochet blanket. Actually, if you've already started, that's totally fine. But here are the 5 things you should know before you get a little bit too far into it. If you're new here, I make crochet content like this, as well as video essays. I just published one last week about the sassy man apocalypse and toxic masculinity. So if you want to watch that, then you know where to go. And I also post some life abroad content because I'm an American living in London. So if you're interested in any of that, please do subscribe. We are close to 1K, so woo! Let's keep going. And as always, if you have any questions at all regarding living abroad or crochet, or you have video essay topics that you want me to cover, then comment down below and let's talk. So I've got my coffee, my crochet, and my notebook. Let's get started. The first thing you should know before you get too far into making your crochet temperature blanket is to worry about the yarn weight. This might seem a bit obvious, especially if you're an intermediate or advanced crocheter, but this is going to be a lot more important in a blanket than you might think it will be. I feel like we worry about weight a lot for garments, but for blankets, we kind of assume as long as it's chunky and not too fine, then it's what we want, and that it'll be a bit forgiving because at the end of the day, it's just like a giant sheet, you know? But what I really recommend that you do is to make sure that every single skein, ball, whatever you want to call it, of yarn is the same exact weight. And that's because if it's not, then the edges of your crochet are going to start to get a bit funky. It bothers me to this day that my crochet blanket is wavy in some parts and wavy on the edges simply because I was using some DK yarn, some super chunky yarn, etc., thinking it would all be fine, but no, it's not. In that same vein, I would recommend only using chunky yarn. My least favorite parts are the parts where I was just using like regular DK. And it's fine, it's still really soft. But if it was all more like this, that would make me very, very happy. I even tried remedying this issue by double stranding some of my yarn, and that's when it was too big. So the yarn was either too big or too small, but I also wasn't going to not use all the yarn that I bought or buy more simply because it wasn't the right weight. So I just went with it, and it's a bit quirky, but that would be my first recommendation. The second thing you need to know is that you don't have to go with conventional colors. This might seem obvious to some people, but I feel like this is one of those things where if you're a bit type A like me, you might have it in your head like, okay, it's a temperature blanket. The cold temperatures are going to be blues and the hot temperatures are going to be oranges and reds. But this doesn't always result in the most appealing blanket depending on your style. It's very literal. I used this color scheme from a British crochet creator that I found on Pinterest, and I thought it was a super unique color scheme because, you know, it's kind of obvious, you know, gray is colder, and then the hottest color is this sort of like orangey red. And I could really see someone, you know, starting their crochet temperature blanket, getting their blues and their reds, and then they start and they realize like it gives a very scientific vibe to your crochet, which some people might like. But I think having a blue to red blanket is I think it's hard to make that go into your home, and you might not end up wanting to use it, and even worse, you might not end up wanting to even finish it if you don't love the colors. And when you commit to something for a year, it's like you want to make this all year, and you know, you're committed to it. But if you start hating it like a quarter of the way through and then you stop, then you just have a weird like strip of cloth of colors that you don't even like anymore. So I would highly recommend looking into more unconventional color palettes. And something that might be even more important is to think of the temperature ranges that you are most likely going to experience where you live or wherever you're recording the temperature for in your blanket. And I say this because, you know, imagine if you lived in Arizona. I don't know if you're gonna make a temperature blanket if you live in Arizona, but you don't want to be working with a palette that starts at 20 degrees Fahrenheit in, you know, a city like Chicago. If you do, then you'll end up with a blanket that's just, you know, all one or two colors, and that's not as exciting. So if you live in a place where the temperature doesn't vary that much, maybe you want smaller increments for different colors. Basically what I'm saying is don't blindly follow the color palette that you see someone make online, or that you just like the colors but you don't pay attention to what their temperature ranges are, because you're going to have to shift things based on the climate where you live. I would recommend probably a maximum of like 8 colors. My third tip for your temperature blanket is to stay organized. And I know that that's really annoying because crochet is fun and it should be relaxing and enjoyable, but it's just going to be stressful if you're not organized in the first place. So let's talk about it. The way I stayed organized with this temperature blanket was really simple. I just had a note open on my computer, and I was actually doing the average temperature over 2 days. So basically 2 days would pass and then I would average the high and the low temperature over those days and find the average and then choose the color and write it down. This might seem really easy, but life gets busy and we get forgetful. So again, using something like AccuWeather where you can see the temperature for the last few months every single day, and if you just want to be super accurate, if you're someone like me, then you might end up, you know, skipping a few weeks. Maybe I skipped 2 months or so when using this, and I would just go through, do all my math, find the average temperature for every 2 days, and write down all my colors, and then I would get to catching up on my crochet. And again, you might be telling yourself, oh, I'm just going to do 1 row every day, like everyone says to do. One of these rows, granted I wasn't as advanced at crochet when I made this, but one of these rows probably took me like 20 minutes. So keep that in mind and write down the temperature each day if you can, or use historical data, but don't be like me and wait 2 months to catch up. The fourth tip that I want to give you for your temperature blanket is regarding materials. And I hate to say it, but unless you have a lot of money to spare, I do recommend using fairly affordable yarn. So while I would love to recommend that you make this blanket completely out of, you know, wool, silk, bamboo, really soft, beautiful, natural materials, that's going to get really pricey. I mean, this blanket is huge. If you're making a temperature scarf, then yes, treat yourself, get some really nice wool, but that's gonna be a really expensive project. Again, if you have the money to do it, then yes, use your favorite wool and make it like super natural and soft, but most likely I would recommend like looking up nice blanket yarns. Typically yarns are labeled as blanket yarns if they're really soft, and you might end up using wool acrylic blends or just pure acrylic. Some of these, the nicest parts, are like wool blends. And you know, I wish I could have used it the whole way through, but it would have been too expensive. And yes, you're buying the yarn over time, so you might not even notice it. But if you start to calculate how much money you've spent on yarn for a blanket or any project of this size, you might get a little bit scared. So get a cozy but cheap yarn. And the fifth and final tip that I have for anyone making a crochet temperature blanket is to have a schedule for weaving in your ends. This kind of goes with staying organized, but that was more about, you know, getting the rows done, keeping track of the colors and the temperatures that you need to do. But the weaving is something that most of us hate to do. I know some crocheters actually enjoy the weaving process, but I can't relate. So don't be like me and wait till the end to do it. Keep on a schedule. I don't think it's realistic to do it after every single row, but maybe after every 5 rows or maybe once a month. But even then, you're going to be weaving in lots of ends. One way to get around this is to actually leave all of your ends and to make sure that your ends are a decent length, and then just cut them all even at the end, and there you have a crochet fringe. But if you don't like the fringe look on a blanket, which I'm not sure if I even do, weave in your ends every few rows. And hold yourself accountable, because you're going to hate it when you have to do all of it at the end. Even now, you know, this blanket is a year and a few months old or something. I'm still constantly finding little ends that I didn't weave in properly. And, you know, sometimes I try to, if I see one, I'll weave it back in, like with my finger. But I do wish that I had done some proper weaving in so that it would be seamless. But she's a quirky blanket, you know, she has a story to tell. And if you want a bonus tip, add a border, because it's just really cute. That's my bonus tip. If you made it this far into the video, comment the teddy bear emoji, because we're feeling cozy today. Anyways, those were my 5 tips for your temperature crochet blanket. Hopefully you've watched this video before you got too far into things, but you know, it's only January. You can always frog a little bit, or return some yarn if you realize that you don't have all the same yarn weights, or tweak your color palette and go from there. Ooh, another thing about colors is maybe buy the warmer colors later on. And I say this because of climate change, you know? I wasn't expecting to use this much of like the red orange, but I did. So do with that what you will. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see any more crochet content, life abroad content, or video essays, then please do subscribe and comment down below any questions you might have. And good luck with your temperature blanket. Stick with it, it is worth it. But you'll probably never do it again. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.